morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Karen Tucker. I'm the CEO of the Churchill Club, and I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers for the multiplier effect this morning. And we have with us Tom Kelley, Marguerite Hancock, Tom Friel, Rami Branitzky, and of course our moderator, Liz Wiseman. I want to give a special thanks to SAP for opening their doors to us this morning. Why don't we just give them a round of applause for their generosity. Let's see, so finally I would like to welcome and thank our members for your support. And those of you who may not be members yet, if you do enjoy this morning's program, we encourage you to consider becoming a member. Literature is available here at the program and also on our website at churchillclub.org. Let's see, and so the other thing that I wanted to tell you before we get started is that our next event is going to be held on July 15. And it features Shai Agassi, the dynamic CEO of Better Place, in a rare U.S. appearance. Very excited about that. That will be at the Santa Clara Marriott. Hope that you can join us. And then after that, we have a life sciences breakfast that focuses on the impact of healthcare reform on the life sciences industry, and that is on July 23rd. That will be a breakfast at Fenwick and West. Finally, my last announcement today, if you are tweeting, please do use #Churchill Club so that everybody can follow along the conversation. We actually often do have folks attend from remote areas via Twitter, so they'll appreciate your comments, I'm sure, being here in the room. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Liz Wiseman. Liz is president of the Wiseman Group, and she's co-author of a new book called Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. Liz has been in her consulting practice and R&D practice for leadership in Silicon Valley for about 5 years. She previously spent 17 years at Oracle, 16 of those in executive management. And she said that while at Oracle and observing the leadership styles of various people there that she interacted with over the years, this notion of multipliers versus diminishers, and you will shortly learn exactly what those terms mean, began to surface for her, and she jokes that writing the book and doing the research with over 150 leaders, collecting data and so forth, was her post-Oracle therapy. At any rate, we're very interested to hear the insights that you and the speakers will be able to share with us this morning. Let's welcome Liz Wiseman.
Thank you. It is great to be here. It's great to be here talking about this subject of multipliers. And what we're going to do today is explore this idea that leaders can be multipliers inside their organization. Now, we know that there's a lot of people, particularly in technology here in this valley, who very quickly get promoted into management based on their smarts and their capability. The problem comes when some of these leaders never look beyond the things that got them there to really see and utilize the genius that sits on their team. And some of these leaders who don't look beyond their own intelligence, their own ideas, to see the genius on their team, they can end up draining intelligence. We call these leaders diminishers. And I thought it was interesting the chair goes down right when I say diminishers.
Yeah, right on cue.
It was like it was on cue. In our research, we've really seen a different model. We've seen a model of leadership where smart leaders use their intellect to amplify the intelligence of other people. We call these leaders multipliers. And what I would like you to do over this next hour is be thinking about two things as you're listening to the ideas from the panel and contemplating this idea that leaders can serve as multipliers. I want you to be thinking about two leaders that you've worked with, two colleagues you've had, two managers, one who was a multiplier to you, someone around whom you became smart and more capable, and someone who might have been a diminisher, someone who made you question your own intelligence, someone around whom you couldn't contribute. And I want you also to be thinking about yourself and your own leadership. What kind of leader are you? And hopefully as we explore these ideas with this panel, you'll see the benefit of leading like a multiplier, and you'll see how leaders who do serve as multipliers in their organization don't get a little bit more from their people and their organization, they get vastly more. And that's one of the messages that we hope will come out today. I'm going to take a few minutes just to introduce these ideas. I'll introduce the panel to you, and I like to think of it as meet the multipliers. Meet the people who are out there leading like this, hear how they think, what they do, and the kinds of results they get from their organization. We will conclude the panel at about 15 minutes to the hour. We'll have a chance to have questions. We encourage interesting questions, provocative questions, challenging questions to explore some of these ideas. And I'll conclude with just a couple final thoughts about what is possible for people who choose to lead like a multiplier. So with that, let me just start with asking you a question. Who is a multiplier to you? I want you to think about someone. What did they do? What did they get out of you? Someone around whom you were smart and capable. Someone who enabled you to operate as a genius. What did they do, and how much of you and your capability did they get? I also want you to think about a diminisher. Someone around whom you held back. Someone who perhaps needed to be the smartest person in the room and didn't leave a lot of space for anyone else. What did they do? And how much of your capability, if you had to rank it on a scale of 1 to 100, how much of your capability did they get? When we did this research, we went out and talked to scores of successful professionals, and we asked them to do exactly what I've asked you to do, to identify someone who we came to call a multiplier and someone around whom we came to call a diminisher, and what they got from them. And people told us their story. I'm just going to share one of those stories with you quickly to get us started. This is a man named Vikram who was an engineering manager. And he had worked at Intel, had a long career at Intel, was one of the early folks there. And he described working for two different managers. Both were division managers, same company, same role, but they had a vastly different impact on him. The first was George Schneer. He said, George not only ran profitable businesses, but he had this way of creating genius all around him. He said, around George, I was a rock star around George. I was brilliant. He said, in fact, we were all brilliant around him. What was so amazing about George is he was smart. He knew the technology. He knew the business, but he never seemed to need to prove it to anyone else. He spent his time unleashing genius inside his organization. Vikram said, in a typical management meeting, George spoke maybe 10% of the time. It was usually to define an opportunity or to crisp up a problem statement, and then he would turn his team loose and let them find answers. Many of these answers were worth incremental millions to the business. He said, George got everything from me. He got 100%. He made me. He made my career. Contrast that to the next divisional manager he went to work for, ran a very large business inside of this company. He was a brilliant scientist. We'll call his name Frank. It's part of the witness protection program. And he was a brilliant scientist, but he did all the thinking for everyone. Vikram said Frank had an answer for everything. He thought for people. He had an answer for people. In a typical management meeting, he talked the majority of time. And he spent his time selling his ideas to people, telling people what to do, and he spent a lot of his energy telling people what they were doing wrong. He was brilliant, but he didn't create brilliance around him. Vikram said, my job was more like cranking than creating. He got maybe half of my capability, and I would never work for him again. This is an example of a multiplier and a diminisher, both in the same company, both holding the exact same role with the same responsibilities, but they had a vastly different impact on people. When we did our research, we found that these multipliers and these diminishers see the world very, very differently. In short, diminishers kind of look out across a room and they see scarce intelligence. They say very few smart people. It's almost like it's binary. It's like, smart, Smart, dumb, definitely dumb. You know, they see very, very few smart people.
You're pointing to anyone.
No, there was no particular. I was sort of pointing into space, Rami. He's not here at SAP. We don't do that. And because they see such a scarcity of intelligence, they have this notion that no one's going to figure it out without me. Their intelligence becomes central in an organization. You can imagine what they do. I don't even need to go through the details of what we found out they do. You could predict them based on this assumption that people won't figure it out without me. Well, you would tell people what to do. You would make the decisions. You would micromanage. You know, people around you would be there to support you and your empire, so to speak. Multipliers see the world in a very different way. They see abundant intelligence. They look out at a room and they see a lot of smart people. They see all sorts of different types of smarts, and they know how to access and use that intelligence. Sort of the assumption that goes across their head is that people are smart and will figure it out. Now, if you came to work every day and you had the assumption that people are smart and will figure it out, how would you manage? What would you do? Well, yeah. Exactly. You would point people in the right direction. It'd be a critical role, is to point people and then get out of their way and let them solve it. What else would you do? Right here. Yeah, you would ask a lot of questions. It's one of the things we found. They give people space. They challenge people. They ask people to do really, really hard things. It's one of the things that Marguerite does so exceptionally well, is they're not afraid to ask people to do hard things. They give them space, they create debate, and they don't take over. And the final thing that we found is that these multipliers actually get twice the capability from people around them. Diminishers, in general, get about half of that capability. So what we'd like to do now is give you a chance to hear from some of these people who are multipliers, aspiring multipliers, people who are really looking to lead this way and to build this kind of leadership for themselves and their organizations. Let me introduce each to you. I'll start here with Rami. We are here in Rami's hometown. Rami is the managing director for the SAP Labs here, which is one of SAP's innovation centers, one of several around the world. He joined SAP in 2001 and also ran the partner software solutions group for SAP globally. He's got a lot of interesting global experience, having worked in Israel, Germany, here in the States. And Rami is also someone who has gotten kind of early access to some of these ideas and has really set out to be more of a multiplier himself. And I think he's going to share some great perspective on how do you do some of these things and how do you learn to do some of these things. So Rami, welcome.
Thank you.
Tom Friel is the former CEO and chairman of the board of Heidrick Struggles and has had a 30-year career in executive search and assessment. He's also a senior advisor to Bridgespan. And Tom is someone who is known for being a multiplier in his own leadership in Heidrick, and was known for creating an open environment and a very intense environment. But if anyone knows how to spot a multiplier or diminisher, it's probably Tom. He spent years finding people, placing people, and has this great insight into what kind of people really grow and scale companies. So Tom, welcome. Marguerite Gong Hancock is the director of Stanford's, the SPRI organization. Let me get this acronym just exactly right. It's the Stanford Program on Regions of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And Marguerite is really an expert on innovation and how do you generate innovation in different parts of the world, Silicon Valley, as well as China. And she's the author of several books on this subject, Silicon Valley Edge, most notably. And Marguerite is an interesting multiplier. She's one of the multipliers we've profiled in the book, not only in her work professionally, but she has a very active life as a youth leader out in the community. And there's some really interesting stories about her and how she really shines a spotlight on people and has been a talent magnet in a very important organization. Marguerite, welcome. And Tom Kelley, who is the general manager for IDEO, which is this really, really amazing design and development firm just a couple miles from here in downtown Palo Alto. It's one of the sort of much sought after, much benchmarked organizations in the world on design, responsible for the original Apple mouse, the Palm 5, and just took a tour there to some of the most amazing things. He's the author of 2 books on innovation, and The Art of Innovation and 10 Faces of Innovation. And Tom has done some very similar research, and I think he's going to bring some great perspective on how people who lead as multipliers, how that relates to innovation in their organization. So Tom, thanks for joining us. Let's get started with just an overview of what does it mean to be a multiplier. And why don't we start with Marguerite?
I think a multiplier is somebody, I love the image of a time sign that is potential for geometric growth. And I think a multiplier is somebody who looks at the positive, because we know what happens when you multiply negative things, right? And a multiplier is somebody who can identify the positive, the capacity, the competence in somebody, and then create the environment, create the incentives, create the relationships and the role and the vision to help those individuals, and I think really importantly in an organization, to get the combinations of those people together so that they can multiply each other. So it's not in any way a hub and spoke kind of relationship, but really a network where you have people multiplying each other and creating value and creativity.
Okay, great. Rami, what does it mean to be a multiplier?
I actually think that I'd like to take it in somewhat of a different direction. Instead of talking about the individual, talk about the organization. An organization, successful organizations over time, if you think about revenue growth or productivity growth, what have you, at the end of the day, there's no linear correlation between their growth and the amount of people that it can actually hire. And at some point, you have to understand that productivity depends on people's ability to do more. And therefore, it's predicated on your ability to multiply others. So especially in large organizations where the instinct is to go out and ask for more resources and to get an answer of no, you have to figure out a way to actually do more with less. And this is where the multipliers come in. Without them, you essentially don't have the ability to grow an organization.
Yeah. So they're leaders who create nonlinear growth in organizations.
Exactly.
Yeah, kind of an exponential type growth. Tom.
Well, I think I'd like to pick up on that point because, we had an exercise for many years that we would do about once a year in our firm when we would pull some of our groups together. We used to call it the power of 10, and it was based on what would we have to do. These discussions, what would we have to do to increase whatever it was that we wanted to try to increase: revenue, time to complete our projects, productivity per partner by 10 times. Am I not on? Is that better? Am I on now? Okay. And the notion was, if you're going to, you can increase something 25%, 50%, maybe even 100%, double it by just, flogging the troops and getting everybody to work harder. But if you're going to try to increase something by orders of magnitude, 10 times was just something that, we pulled out of the air, you have to rethink everything that you do, and you have to do it on the basis of, we just can't work hard. We have to work a lot smarter. People have to help each other. We have to grow the organization. And we have to all think collectively about setting and achieving standards beyond which none of us really thought we could do. And I think the notion, which I resonated to in the book, was the notion that if you can convince people that they individually and as a group can do things way beyond what any of them thought that they could do, would ever think they could do, then maybe you might not reach 10 times, but you will reach levels of individual performance, individual satisfaction, and pride in what they do that's beyond what any other organization that you compete with can do. And this to me is encapsulated in this book in some of the thinkings, and I couldn't agree more with some of the conclusions in the book.
So inherent in this, it's a leadership that sees a lot of capability and challenges and stretches the organization and the people to do more. Tom, particularly from the innovation angle, what does it mean to be a multiplier?
Sure. So in the context of the way we look at the world, my current book is called The 10 Faces of Innovation, and one's called the Director. And so in a kind of a framework that I had previously, I'm moderately new to the multipliers, thinking, by the way, it changes the way you look at the world. I walk around now thinking, are they a multiplier, or are they more of a diminisher? And I look at myself as well, which is slightly humbling when you do that. But as far as previous frameworks, we have this thing we call the director. And what we mean by that is, if you think of the metaphor of a great film director or director of stage, they never take the stage themselves. Right? There was that notable exception. Alfred Hitchcock used to like to make at least a cameo appearance in his films. But other than that, the director doesn't appear on screen. The actors do. Right? And so what the directors do, and I think this is a close metaphor to the multipliers, is they see it as their role to find the most talented, the most creative people in the world and turn them into stars. Right? One of my favorite people on leadership, a guy named Warren Bennis, says the number one role for any leader is to create new leaders, right? And so that's really what the multiplier is doing, is trying to create new leaders. As far as real directors, I had the chance to spend a couple of minutes with Francis Ford Coppola recently. One of the things Coppola said, this is 18 months ago, but it's really stuck with me. Coppola said, if you're working with creative people, you don't tell them what to do, you invite them to the party. And so I think that's what the multipliers do. They invite you to the party.
Yeah, and I think this word invite is critical. They invite people's best thinking, and they invite contribution. It's almost like you can't command people's best thinking. You can only issue that invitation for people to do great work around you. Let's talk a little bit about the work environment they create. And maybe, Tom, starting with you, how do you create an environment where people do their best work, but also feel obligated to do their best work?
Well, I think I'd make 2 points. One is you have to take away the fear, and I think one of the things that a good leader does is take away fear, because if there's fear in an organization, and fear can come into an organization in a lot of ways, but mostly it comes from the leadership who instill it. A fearful organization or fearful team members or employees will never perform anywhere close to their best, because they're spending too much time worried about what happens if I do something wrong and what the penalties of that are. So you have to take away fear. And one of the ways that you can do that is by celebrating people who conquer fear. The second thing is, I think you have to set standards really, really high. I mean, you have to encourage people to perform way beyond anything that they thought that they could ever do, recognizing that oftentimes they'll come up short. And lastly, and I think this is an important part of the message, is you have to have accountability both for the people individually and for their contributions to the team. And you have to be actually pretty ruthless in terms of dealing with people who are either not pulling their weight, who don't buy into the program, or who are doing things that are dysfunctional to the team. So I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that multipliers are great leaders who follow some of these precepts are soft, squishy, feel-good people who want to make everybody feel good. And I think the opposite is actually just more often the case. You feel good when you win, and you win when the team performs. And I think celebrating those wins in a culture of team performance, where the team is the most important thing and the performance is the most important thing, and individual superstars can be tolerated and can be celebrated, should be celebrated, but they've got to play with the team, or they can't be on the team. And I think if you keep some of those things in mind, some of these principles really come true.
Tom, those are great insights, and it is one of the things that was one of our surprising findings is these leaders make people feel brilliant, they feel exhilarated working for them, but they're hard-edged leaders. These are the kind of leaders you would do anything not to disappoint. There's a definite edge to these kind of leaders. Marguerite, how do you create this environment where people can do their very best thinking? You're in the academic world, as well as working with teenagers.
Well, I like this idea of a director, and to build on that, I live a lot in the music world, also another part of my life, and you think of a director who can have a soloist as a violinist, a fantastic virtuoso, and yet needs to make harmony and needs to be a part of an orchestra. But I'd actually like to take this metaphor even further and say that I think the best multipliers, the best multiplying organizations, and this connects to kind of our work in high-tech regions, what enables them to not only be creative and competent, but sustainable over time, right? And I think this happens when individuals or organizations or regions can really collaborate to be creative. And in that sense, I'd maybe like to kind of key off what Rami said and think of, instead of an orchestra, think of a jazz ensemble, where you have a leader, a multiplier who thinks of the chord progressions, maybe establishes the key melody, but then all the ensemble players begin this very collaborative interaction. And I think in that sense, a great environment is one where people can collaborate and learn with each other, so they're collaborating, and then creatively change over time to respond in a business sense to the changes in technology, changing business environment, changing competitors. But I think that's what we're seeing in Silicon Valley as we're moving, for example, to the green tech. You have this recombination of resources, and I think some of the best organizations or best regions are the ones where they can collaborate and change and create over time.
And Tom, Kelley, IDEO is known as this icon of innovation. How do you create that environment where people can do their best creative work?
Sure. I think it's really, we would characterize it as building an idea-friendly environment. We've all been in both kinds of environments. In the non-idea-friendly environment, people belittle your ideas. You come up with something and they say, well, that's kind of half-baked, or the devil's advocates pounce on your idea as soon as it comes out, and that's really fun to do. I mean, you can just look like the smartest person in the room because you come up with some clever, witty thing that kills the idea, right? But ideas are kind of fragile at the beginning, and they sometimes need support. So in an idea-friendly environment, people defer judgment a little bit. They try to build on it. One of the most popular phrases at IDEO is, how might we? You hear this idea that is stupid in some ways, but your first reaction is, okay, how might we take this idea that is not fully baked yet, but make it a little better? And so, for the leaders in the room, and I think, there's quite a few people probably here in leadership roles, one thing we do with our clients is we encourage them to develop this skill we call squinting, which is somebody comes to you with an idea. Maybe it's a physical prototype, or maybe it's just a raw idea, and it's a little rough around the edges, right? But if you just squint, if you ignore all the surface details, and you just look at the shape of the idea, and then respond to the shape of the idea, not the surface details. Because for you as a leader, so this is what Tom was talking about with the kind of what comes from executive management. If you as a leader critique the details, like, oh, you've got typos in this report, or gee, that's an ugly prototype, or whatever, people will learn that lesson. The lesson they will learn is, must make it perfect before I show it to the boss. But you, as the boss, then see a lot fewer ideas because people spent way too much time polishing it, right? Whereas if you squint, if you ignore the surface detail and say, okay, obviously you're not quite there yet, but let's take it one more step, wow, word will get out. The message will be heard by the whole organization that this is the boss that you can take ideas to. This is the boss who will build on your ideas instead of making you feel stupid for not having your idea fully finished before you showed it to him or her.
I think this idea of squinting is brilliant. It reminds me of one story we heard when we were doing our research. We were interviewing someone who had directed Tom Cruise. And he said, oh, multipliers, well, you ought to study Tom Cruise because every idea to this man is a great idea. And most people are so nervous taking ideas to him. He goes, oh, that's a great idea. How could we build on it? How might we? And he has this way of taking other actors' ideas and directors and everyone on the set and taking it and plussing them until they come up with a workable idea.
That's including jumping up and down a sofa.
I think that was one of them. So let's talk a little bit about the role that these multipliers in innovation. And Rami, I'm catching you as you're drinking here. This is obviously one of the roles that this lab plays.
Sure.
How do multipliers help create innovation in your world?
First, I just want to capture great thoughts, and I just want to add, my observation as I was listening. I think that we should not mistake this to be an attribute or that is essentially an individual, meaning there is no such thing as, in my opinion, a person who is the multiplier. There's a set of behaviors. And I think that, especially as I was listening to your examples, I think that we all are somewhere on the spectrum between being a diminisher and being a multiplier. And our days or behaviors or instances in which we operate as a diminisher, and our days and instances in which we operate as a multiplier, hopefully more of the latter. But I think it's important to distinguish between the individual definition of a multiplier and the behavioral aspect of it, which I think is the true definition. Now, talking about innovation, and I think that the ideas that were raised here are right on. I think that at the end of the day, your ability to create and your ability to think outside the box is predicated on how free you feel in terms of expressing your thoughts. And at the end of the day, I also think that, and I've seen it many, many instances in which ideas are shut down because people are trying to show that they are essentially the smartest people in the room. And the end result of that is that you have an overall collective diminished performance of an organization, especially when it comes to something which is as fragile as innovation, because people feel insecure with their ideas, because people feel that sometimes they're not being heard for whatever reason, whether it's a personal matter, whether it's an organizational hierarchy. There are many blocks or hurdles along the way that could diminish one's performance or ability to innovate. And I think in that sense, the multiplier's job, especially in executive management, needs to be the one who recognizes these hurdles and try to remove them along the path for the team and create an environment in which people can actually express themselves and become much more free to innovate, create and innovate.
Well, and it's interesting because you're talking about how fragile innovation is and how you have to remove some of that. Let's talk a little bit about the other side, about sort of that hard-edged. And Marguerite, when I was talking to so many people who had worked with you in your work as a youth camp director up in the Sierras, which is how you spent your last 6 summers, is people said, she asked me to do things that were like hard, outrageously hard things I didn't think I could ever do. And they talked about this exhausting kind of work, but how exhilarating it was and so ready to do it again. How do you ask people to do hard things? And what happens when you do?
Well, I think we had this vision of taking kids from East Palo Alto to Atherton and then creating a community in the Sierras and creating an environment where they could learn about themselves, learn about nature, build friendships, and have this sort of transformative time in the mountains. And part of it was building a dream team and identifying people who could be role models, but a lot of it was having a shared vision, creating a vision, and then giving people responsibility and saying, okay, you have this time when everyone in the camp is going to be together for an hour and a half during campfire. What's the possibility? And first you kind of think of traditional things. Oh, we'll have a few people do some skits. No, what if? And I think that's another question. It's the what if, right? What if? So giving them that license to create. And one of, I think, my proudest moments as sort of a leader who's trying to be a multiplier was we had a night, Sunday night. We planned this camp in every kind of possible way, and I got a call. The Sierra fire has come through your camp. You have a choice. You're scheduled to leave in 12 hours. Do you cancel camp, look for a new location? What do you do? So we have all these people, hundreds of people geared to go. And in 12 hours, we literally, from this organization, found a new location and then took something had been very carefully crafted to be at one place, hikes, experiences, and moved it to a new location. And I think that's a real experience where you're creating hard situations where people have learned about their own capacity to do something and the relationships of who can you rely on, and then they changed it to a whole new situation. And I think that's part of creating this intense environment, is asking people to do hard things, but in that process they learn that they can do something not even where you planned it, but where you rise to meet a new occasion and you can solve it, you can master it, you can surmount whatever comes at you.
It was so interesting to us when we did this research about how these multipliers asked people to do hard things and they fully utilize people. And what we found that was so interesting is that people find being utilized and asked to do hard things exhilarating. When people aren't asked to do this, when they're operating at half capacity, when they're working for diminishers, and they're not giving it all, they find it exhausting. Isn't that interesting? We find working hard exhilarating, but not being used well exhausting. I think multipliers figure out how to create that exhilaration. Tom, I want to talk with you a little bit about spotting multipliers. You have such great perspective, 30 years of placing people, seeing some able to scale organizations and others not do it. How do you spot people who are going to lead this way?
Well, it's actually not that hard, in my opinion, because I think the difference between multipliers and diminishers at the extremes is obvious. They're very easy to sort out. But people, as Rami said, can be different things on different days at different times, and diminishers, in fact, are usually the best salespeople for themselves because they are self-focused, which is what makes them a diminisher. So they're real good at trying to convince you that, in fact, they're a great leader because they talk about all the great leadership stuff that they personally have done. Well, this is the first sign. I mean, to me, if I enter into a discussion with people, whether and it was actually quite similar recruiting executives for our corporate clients for senior roles, or recruiting people who would come and work for Heidrick Struggles as consultants and later partners and senior partners who would do this work as well. I developed a couple of questions that I would ask people early on in interviews, and then have the discipline myself to shut up and let them answer, because there's actually nothing more effective than asking somebody a tough question and then just shutting up. Because oftentimes they'll give an answer and you ask a follow-on question, tell me a little bit more, and then they'll give a follow-on answer and you say, okay, well, that's interesting, tell me a little bit more. You'll learn all kinds of things just if you don't move on until you've really gotten to the essence of what they're saying. And one of the questions that I would ask people is, tell me about your successes and tell me about your team. And it's amazing. When you ask a multiplier to tell you about their team, they light up like a Christmas tree. They want to talk about, this guy did this, and these guys, I found these guys, and you would not believe what they were able to do. They're not talking about themselves. They're talking about their team. A diminisher, yeah, they'll make one or two quick comments. Yeah, they were really good people, and within 30 seconds, they're back to talking about themselves again. And I mean, you can really just, I mean, the easiest thing to do in an interview, if you want to do something just really simple, is just write on a piece of paper, put I and put we, and just put a little tick mark down there for how many times somebody uses the word I versus the term we.
Call that the I-we ratio.
The I-we ratio, yeah, that's. Had another one I used to call the Arrogance Competence ratio, which was a 4-box matrix, which we could get into that sometime. That's going to be a chapter in my book. But the other thing, the other question that I would often ask people, particularly relevant in a professional service environment, is a very simple question, and I think you could probably use this in some of your own interviewing. Somewhere in the discussion, I would always find a way to ask this question or some variation of it. Who's here? Who's here because of you? And you just ask them that question and see how they respond.
Here is their current company, where they're working.
Their current company. And if a multiplier just starts ticking people off. And in many cases, they've worked for them in 2 or 3 different environments. And this person's great. He followed me from here to here. And then we went over here and he followed me from here to here. And then, he's got these great people and she worked for him and they're all here. I mean, the thing just builds like a pyramid. With a diminisher, they struggle to answer that question. Because typically these are people that when they move from company A to company B and from company B to company C in their career, they move alone.
Yeah, because people are throwing a party back in their own
throwing a party. And these are the people that say, thank God he's gone. I'll follow him. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and
I'd never work for him again ever.
And this one of the things we found is we thought originally that these multipliers were talent scouts. They were great at finding talent, and we were wrong. What we learned is that they're talent magnets.
Talent finds them.
Yeah, talent finds them. People want to go and work for them. They want to follow them to the next job because it is so much fun to be challenged and stretched and grown, and then have the spotlight be shined on you as a result of your work. So they're absolute talent magnets. They also release talent out into the organization because they know there's a steady stream of people there to replace it. So those are great questions. We're going to open up for questions in just a couple minutes. I want to talk a little bit with Rami about, some of the work that you've done to try to really build some of these practices, these behaviors, as you pointed out earlier, in your own leadership. What has been important, and how has that come along?
Well, it's always, first thing is self-awareness, and the ability to recognize where you are in terms of your career path and your personal development. And I think the natural tendency, especially if you consider yourself to be an ascender in an organization, is to be the one who has the answers. I know what's going on. I can give you the answer, whether it's someone who you report to, or a colleague, or someone on your own team. You're the hub, and there's a hub and spoke mentality where you feel that you're in the center of this, and therefore you need to start providing all the answers. And over time, you realize that, in a sense, and without even trying to frame this in a diminishing or versus multiplier framework, you are a diminisher. You are someone who takes away from the rest of the team, and you're being perceived as such. Once you recognize this in your own mind, you need to start working on a set of behaviors that take you from being a diminisher to something which is more of a multiplier. And the first thing is you have to shut up more, and you have to recognize the fact that you talk too much. And sometimes during meetings, I catch myself and I'm like, I've been talking too much. And instead of that, you need to start thinking about, how do I pull people and draw them into the conversation and draw the best out of them. And the way to do this is by asking the right questions, which is, it sounds trivial, but is extremely difficult for a couple of reasons. First, you want to ask the right questions in terms of soliciting the right answers from them. You also need to have, frankly, and I think this is really a key thing, you need to have the intellectual honesty to recognize that because all of us have some preconceived notions about what is the end result. When you start asking questions, you think you know the end result. And you essentially think, as a coach, I'm just going to walk them through the path of getting to the end result. Well, somewhere along the way, you could have instances in which someone actually is proving you wrong in your mind. And you need to have the intellectual capacity and intellectual honesty to recognize that and walk with them along that path that you didn't necessarily perceive in your mind when you started this journey. And it could be something that takes a 2-minute conversation, or it could be something that takes months in terms of asking the question. Depends on the process. But I think that that intellectual honesty is key. And finally, I think it's a matter of trust. You need to trust yourself, and you need to trust the team, and you have to build a relationship in which they trust you. Because the first time you start changing your behavior, what you'll see is people actually shut down as a first result. Because there's like, why is he asking me all these questions all of a sudden? You never ask
a diminisher who goes down the path of asking a lot of questions can be a very dangerous combination.
Exactly. So until people start trusting you and understanding that what you're trying to achieve here is to get the best out of them and out of the team, this is a transition phase that you have to be cognizant of, and essentially let the team build trust in you.
Yeah, and I think what Rami's hit on is asking questions is one of the key skills, and it's the orientation of the multiplier. They are intellectually curious. They want to know. They ask great questions, and it's one of the most powerful things people can do to kind of get on this path of being a multiplier. And it's a skill that comes at all sorts of levels of sophistication. You can kind of be bad at it at first, but if you stay at it, you'll become good. And it really is the penchant of these great multipliers. Why don't we open up for questions for a while, and then we'll go back to the panel and get a final kind of statement. Right here. Yes.
So on the flip side, how would you be able to manage a diminisher from, somebody that's being led by, say, a diminisher? How would you be able to manage their current state and perhaps, get them to a multiplying behavior?
So how do you help encourage someone else to become a multiplier? Okay. Anyone?
This is somebody who works for you, or that you work for? Or that you work for? You don't, probably. I mean, I think it's very difficult for team members to change deeply ingrained behavior of their bosses. I think the next time the opportunity comes up to make a move, I think you go work for somebody else.
Can I?
Please.
I actually think that you should learn from that experience as well. Every experience is a learning experience, even a negative one. And so there are things that you can learn from people as far as positive behaviors. There are certain observations you can have about people that you report to, about things that you hate, and you want to make sure that you never repeat them. So view it as a learning experience. And I think in your book, Liz, you talk about the permission to become different, or permission to become better. Don't reduce yourself down to the level that you think that you need to adhere to that standard. Don't behave like that. Be who you are, believe in who you are, and ultimately move on.
Yeah. It's amazing on this permission to be better than your boss. It's amazing to me how many people feel like they can't be better leaders than the person they report to. And it's just false thinking. You can be a better leader than your boss, and you can be a multiplier working for a diminishing boss. And in fact, it's one of the best ways to work with a diminisher is be a multiplier to them, because they want so desperately to be smart and be brilliant. And when you are a multiplier to them, it does change that dynamic a little bit. Okay, next question.
We could probably spend an hour listening to any one of you all the way through. But just a question: is there any one situation or one person that you have seen as a multiplier, or one situation where someone really did a fantastic job?
So, there's the easy one. So for me, I work with my brother David, who's always the older brother, and to me, he's been this model in my life. Just remarkable at attracting talented people and letting them soar. I think it gets more interesting as you look at the people who are slightly more controversial. There's a certain celebrity CEO in Silicon Valley who I won't name, so he doesn't get mad at me. My brother's friends with him, and people think he's a maniac. Right, he was on the cover. I think when Fortune magazine did a story a few years back on toughest bosses to work for in America, I think he was on the cover. But here's the thing, and so it would be easy to say in this idea that this is good boss, bad boss. It's not, right? And so he is famously difficult to work with. But I get to see his current ex-employees, and they will tell you, look, I did my best work. The best work of my life was, working under that administration, right? And so that's worth something. It's one thing to be a tyrant, right? But if you can be challenging and have people at the end of the day say they did their best work working for that boss, gee, that still goes in the plus column for me.
Other people, multipliers you've worked for, who have been models for you. Anyone?
Well, I'll take it. The individual who recruited me into the search business is a guy now long retired named David Elliott. Some of you may know him. And David was the manager of our firm's San Francisco office, and sponsored me to open an office in Silicon Valley in the 80s, which I did, and which went real well. And one of the things I didn't realize until years later was he basically pushed me out to do that against the advice of the leadership of the firm and the board, who thought the idea was crazy and I was too young, and that he didn't keep the Silicon Valley office as a satellite of San Francisco, which he well could have, in which case he would have gotten the credit and the revenue, and this office quickly outshadowed the office that had spawned us. And I actually didn't even know until some years later, and maybe it was because I wasn't paying as close attention as I should have, that we had the degree of freedom that we did to do the kind of things that resulted in the successes that we had, because he was so much a multiplier and willing to just cut somebody out from who was a profitable piece of his operation, send them off on their own with a crazy idea, and then just be completely supportive in a kind of a quiet way. And I've tried to follow that lesson through my career. He also taught me something I'll just pass on. It's an interesting expression that I came to learn, and somebody made a point about it earlier in terms of listening. He made a comment early on to me that stuck with me. He said, one of the things you need to know about this business is you need to learn how to be an aggressive listener, which was a term I had never actually heard before. And the first time I heard it, I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Listening is a passive activity, and talking is
Not
we
for
all
John
like
Friel,
to do.
it's not. I heard you listen.
Talking is what we really like to do, because most of us would rather talk than listen. But if you think about the term of being an aggressive listener, which means asking probing questions, it means not accepting flimsy or superficial answers. It means driving down, but knowing, as Rami said, knowing when to shut up, because you can't listen when you're talking. And so, those were a couple things that came from me from a mentor and a multiplier that I was fortunate enough to have at a critical time in my career.
Marguerite, Rami, either of you, or should we go to next question?
I'm happy to jump in, or I see their hands in the room. So
Why don't we do next question? There and then here.
Yeah, so my question is, how do you balance the notion of being a multiplier and the attributes you've talked about, the empowering, question asking, listening, versus handling an employee or a member on your team who's just struggling, needs some direct, a little bit pushing, prodding? For example, someone who's moved from an individual contributor role to their first management role, someone new to the company, struggling to really understand the culture. Help me understand that balance.
go ahead, Anna.
I think that I don't necessarily see the correlation between these situations and taking an approach which is directed by nature. I think that advice or learning could happen in different ways. Yes, you can come up with some list 10 items that you need to know, and here are the things that I expect you to follow. That's one way of doing it. The other one is obviously just like you're educating kids, somewhat of a trial and error, as long as you can contain the error. The other one is obviously the ongoing dialogue and the questioning. And the questioning is not necessarily about what you do, but more along the lines of let's think about this thing together. Let's develop this thing together. Because ultimately, I think that the learning in the long haul is embedded in you. If you ask the questions, then you are essentially on a journey to get to a certain knowledge versus my boss told me I need to do X, Y, Z. And I think that these are key things. So the behaviors are the same, and I think the outcomes should also be the same.
Yeah. I just want to punctuate what Rami said there. Let's think about this thing together. It's such the mentality of a multiplier, and you can do it with employees wherever they are in whatever situation. Let's think about this together. Marguerite, did you want to add to that, or should we go
Sure.
to the next
On
question?
that, in addition to the sort of mentoring role, which to you, there's also that matchmaking. Maybe there's somebody else in the organization that can be their partner, can be that they can apprentice with, that can be a multiplier to them. And then also, in addition to that, I think this, to borrow from the design world, this idea of prototyping, giving bite-sized projects or these areas of responsibility that you can shine the spotlight and say, look at their success, and start with maybe their natural strength, and then help build out on areas that they may need to extend their strengths and learn, and then they can build on success from there. Well, this is an interesting challenge, just to shift geographies. In some of our work at Stanford, we actually interviewed about 50 CEOs in organizations in China, which have had the challenge of rapid growth and the ability to really have a very much look at efficiency rather than effectiveness, look at adding resources because labor was cheap, and not look at trying to get the most productivity out of people. And so interesting to see how people sort of sorted themselves out on what this idea of the kind of command and control people who and that fit with the culture where there was more about sort of benevolent patriarch who was leading. And over time, what we found was the organizations that needed to scale and that also needed to be competitive, they began to bring people up from middle management to upper management, and began this very informal kind of club, actually is what they call it, where they were beginning to share best practices and ideas across their companies informally, and that made a tremendous difference. As we've tracked those companies and those leaders over the last 5 to 8 years, it's been remarkable, the ones who had this culture of learning and collaboration, to see their organizations scale to be some of the powerhouses in China and now going global.
Yeah, Tom, please.
I actually think my experience has been that really great leaders, what I would call great multiplier leaders, will not tolerate having a diminisher on their team for very long. And I think the notion, I don't think it was inherent in the question, but the notion that you have to accept diminishers on a team of multipliers or accept dysfunctional behavior as part of a core leadership team, I actually don't accept that notion. And in fact, in my experience, I think diminisher leaders are much more likely to have all kinds of different people on their teams than multipliers do, because a diminisher leader is mostly concerned about themselves. They doesn't care that much, about what the style is of the other members of the team, because frankly they're not paying that much attention to it, as long as the results are there. But a multiplier leader, a good one, is not going to tolerate for very long dysfunctional team behavior on their core team. I think they'll probably try to change the behavior of a competent team member for a while. But again, I think it's back to the point that these multiplier leaders who are successful are not necessarily soft, feel-good people. If they've got somebody that's dysfunctional on the team and they've tried to change this behavior or get them to modify their behavior to fit the good of the team, and it doesn't happen, they just take them out.
Just one sentence.
Please.
From experience, if you recognize that a CEO, I'm not talking about an executive, a CEO of a company is a diminisher, like hardcore diminisher, stay away from that organization.
I was going to share an
insight,
insight from John Dorp, so godfather of venture capital community. We had him take a look at the book, and he quite liked it, and he wrote this very nice endorsement. It said something like, at the head of every great organization is a multiplier. And I wrote back and I was like, John, thank you for that very nice endorsement. But, I have to kind of disagree again. I think there are a lot of organizations who are led by diminishers. And he wrote back, he's like, Liz, organizations that achieve scale and grow and create market value have to have multipliers at the top. It's imperative. My comment stands. And I'm like, okay. But I thought it was an interesting perspective from someone who studies what organizations really scale and become great, is that they do need this multiplier leadership at the top. So that's John Dorr's perspective to share with you. Why don't we do kind of a final comment from each of the panelists? Any final thoughts? Why does this kind of leadership matter? Or a final thought you'd share with us? Tom.
So, sure. So I have one specific thing, because some of the questions were about, what do you do when there's leaders who really need to learn new skills? And so I have a very specific thing that I do and that I found to be tremendously powerful, which is reverse mentor, right? So some of us have mentors. I just said I have a mentor who's, older than you and shares their wisdom and experience. But we live now in the 21st century in which there's huge opportunity, especially if you're seeing your career, to find a reverse mentor, somebody who is maybe 5 or 10 or 20 years younger than you, because there is learning to be had. I think in agrarian economies or something, like all the older people were smarter than all the younger people, but, it ain't so today. And so there are trends in the world. I hate this, but there are trends in the world that do not start with 50-year-old balding white males. Go figure. Why is that the case? And so here's what you do. You go out tomorrow. You can find yourself a reverse mentor, somebody who's smart and you respect in your organization, and you ask them if they'll play this role for you, if they'll be your scout for new stuff happening. I now have 2 reverse mentors because I believe in it so much, and you will get smarter. They will teach you things, right? And the great thing is they always say yes. Right? You tell them, no, this is not about benefit flowing to you. It's benefit flowing to me, and they still say yes. So get yourself a reverse mentor.
I love this idea. Marguerite, final thoughts.
That's what research assistants are in the academic setting. 2 thoughts on this: how to question yourself as a multiplier. It's not just about growth and value over time. It's about sustainability. What can you do to help things that are going to be sustainable over change and problem solving? And the other is not just who are the people that have influenced you, but where are they not only in your organization, but where have they gone beyond, and what are they doing? There's sort of these spikes of competence as we look at around the world at the high-tech regions that are leading. It's the ones where there are this collection of talent and competence, but they're connected together. So the exciting thing is to not only stay connected with the people that have been a part of your sort of multiplying, but then to start to connect them and see what new things you can create together.
Yeah, it's that network of intelligence, true collective intelligence. Tom?
I think one of the key things that an executive needs to be able to do, if they're going to be a multiplier and if they're going to allow people to work for them to grow, is to know when to get out of the way. I mean, there was an expression that came from Hewlett Packard many years ago called management by walking around. Some of you probably remember it. Well, I co-opted that some years later, and we created a term internal in our firm that I used to call management by walking away. And you know, there was sometimes in a meeting, in a team meeting, where there was some issue where the team was debating, and you'd find all the heads in the room look at you as a leader, saying, "Okay, we've all had this very nice debate. Now, boss, you're going to make the decision." And you can't do this all the time. You have to pick your shots, and you have to know what issue to make it on. But it's actually really a powerful thing every once in a while to say, you know, this has been a really good debate. You're really smart people. I've got another appointment I've got to go to. Why don't you take another half an hour and figure out what you want to do, and then just let me know about it later. Bye. And you leave. And the first couple times you do this, they're looking around like, holy shit, what do we do now? And is he going to come back? And, you know, when you don't come back, or you come back an hour later and say, what did you decide? Well, we didn't decide anything. Oh, well, yeah, well, you should have. So I'm leaving. So I'm leaving again. You can do it. But you have to have the confidence in the people. And I mean, I wouldn't do it the first time on a bet the company decision. So I'll pick something that's manageable. But once you start doing this, it's amazing how empowered people are going to feel.
Well, and can you see the assumption built into this? You are smart and will figure it out. It's how multipliers think. Rami, final thoughts?
I guess my pragmatic advice is it's going to be very much an interesting exercise now and fun one to go out of the room, and hopefully this conversation will stay with you, and to start pointing fingers and to observe other people and their behaviors. And I urge you not to. I actually urge you to focus on yourself, because the only thing that you can really control is yourself. And look at your behaviors. And I'm willing to bet that if you truly are brutally honest with yourself, you'll see many behaviors which are, as Liz calls it, the accidental diminisher, or sometimes diminisher by design. But all of us tend to fall into this trap. So don't think about others, at least for the next 24 hours. Think about yourself and reflect.
Yeah, Rami, thank you for that. I would just, again, encourage you to ask yourself this question. Is it possible that despite my desire to be a good manager, a good leader, a good colleague, I might be accidentally diminishing some of the people around me? And then to just contemplate the possibility of what could happen if you were leading like a multiplier. You know, what is possible with a team of smart and talented people with the whole team operating at 100% brain power? What problems could you solve? What opportunities could be handled? You know, what is really possible if you had the full capability of your team? Karen, over to you.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists and Liz. I want to thank you for sharing your stories and insights so generously with us. And as a small token of our appreciation, we have a high-fashion Churchill Club T-shirt for you. Please wear it in good health. I want to thank the audience for coming out this morning and for having so many good questions. Thank SAP for hosting us. And I think Liz is going to stick around to sign books. This is your ticket. Maybe if you happen to know somebody who is an accidental diminisher, perhaps this will tip them over into the multiplier side of the equation. So we have these available courtesy of Books Inc. this morning. Thank you all for coming and have a wonderful day.